Well, thank you. And apart from anything else, that was very impressive timekeeping, which gives us good time to talk about the issues raised. I mean, I think for somebody kind of watching the world of construction and design of buildings, something that is striking is over the last 15, 20, maybe more years, we have seen more and more codes, rules, measures taken to take risk out of the system, and yet we have seen the terrible failures of that system that Paul referred to. So I wonder, a really big question does seem to be, how do you really make it stick? Which is partly a question of simplicity, presumably. So I don't know where to start. Simon, would you, and what is the sort of one thing that really needs to happen to make all these incredible proliferation of codes really work?
I think it's important to pick up that point that they're necessary but not sufficient.
Yeah.
And they clearly need to have some sort of sanction system, a disciplinary system that backs them up. But that also needs to be done with a degree of sort of public accountability. So it's no point having that sanction process happening in a back room and nobody knows about it. Some of the institutions at the moment publish in quite great detail. The RICS is a shining example, who has been sanctioned and what for and how they got to that decision. Others give no detail at all, and in the middle there's a few who publish little notices in their monthly journals to say this has happened, but with no detail. But without that degree of explanation and saying that there is no communication with either members or the public, and in my view, the role of communication with the wider public, trying to explain this is what a professional does, this is the red lines that a professional have about their behaviour, is the most important part of a code. It is the core explanation of how far you can push a professional, what their ethical duties are, and the institutions particularly need to explain that much better than they do at the moment. They need to be absolutely clear about it, and the best way of doing that is to move towards a single code that can really be discussed and explained right across the industry the whole time, so it becomes well known and understood.
Then the next question is how do you motivate the institutions and businesses to do that? And Liz, you were really talking about the carrot.
Yeah.
There's billions of pounds to be got here.
I think that's, let's be honest, that's the key motivator that gets any part of construction looking at compliance with anything, is if it actually unlocks more better business. And that's really, really important. You're right, you've got to get the sticks there, but the carrots are very important. And we know that government is currently looking at channeling future eco-funding through the new quality mark scheme. We've got a whole raft of these European banks lined up to invest in the UK in major retrofit programs, but they're saying we won't do that yet. We don't have sufficient confidence that you've got the right standards and the code of conduct in place. Put that in place and it unlocks literally billions of pounds of work for really good specialist firms who have, to be honest, I've been coming to the show for 10 years, and every year I've heard people say, where's the market drivers? What are we doing to unlock the job that we know needs to be done in terms of low energy retrofit of our homes and our housing stock? Got the oldest, leakiest housing in Europe. We've got to do something about it. Well, this might be the way that we unlock that market.
And a lot of this money is public money. Is
so
that
some
the
of
key
it's
element,
public money, some is private money, is banks looking to invest. They see the UK market as a real potential, but they just don't have the confidence yet.
And they're scared of what?
Well, it's about putting this framework together. As Philippa said, it's not just the code of conduct, it's a whole set of other enforcement rules and sanctions, actually having some teeth. and it's about the marketing piece on top to promote a quality mark to the ultimate customer, that being it may be a homeowner, but it equally could be a social landlord who also wants to have trust and confidence in the firms that they're bringing in to do their big retrofit programs. If you can put all those pieces together, a right framework, the right structured framework, and launch it with some real gumph, it will
Philippa,
work.
in any kind of sector, how do you motivate businesses to improve their codes of conduct and their ethical behaviour?
Well, yes, I think a lot of businesses actually know it's the right thing to do and doing it off their own bat. The best companies will be doing that. Others who perhaps get tripped up by a crisis or a fine of a major sign or amount, I always say don't waste a good crisis, because it is an opportunity to get the senior management attention. That at the end of the day, the reason why you have failures typically is because good behaviours, good ways of doing business have not been embedded within the organisation. And that, coupled with not having robust mechanisms for individuals to speak up if they see something and have the courage to do it, because it does take courage, but having good mechanisms, robust mechanisms, so they feel they can, that combination actually will leads to better business.
But it's not, yes, the trouble is it's not the best businesses we're talking about. They're not the problem. And if you wait for a failure or a crisis, that's kind of already too late.
I mean, it is too late, and some companies have found that to their cost.
Yeah.
Because the reputation has been lost, and if you go to the state of actually being a distrusted company, so you might have had a very good reputation, you've got a good brand, but that switches and you become distrusted, then there's nothing you can do. You have a very long way back. If you're a trusted brand and you have a slip-up, maybe even a major slip-up, it's much easier to come back and build up again. But it's all about embedding the message, knowing that people, and particularly for what you were talking about, Liz, that you've got a robust mechanisms or ways that people who are unhappy with the service that they've been provided with as customers, that they've got trust and faith in if they raise a complaint, something will be done. That's what it is.
Paul, what can the building industry really do to make these kind of codes stick and have a sort of public presence that everyone knows about?
That's a big question to start with. I think we've touched on a number of the key constituents of this, which is, as I said earlier, it's about individual behaviours. It's about people knowing fundamentally what is the right thing to do and what is the wrong thing to do. And there have been examples. I spoke on the topic of ethics last year, and I used a couple of examples. And I'm glad Philippa mentioned reputational risks, because most people now, if you talk about Volkswagen, will talk about the diesel dupe scandal. That's a huge impact. The consequence of that was their chief exec obviously resigned, and the first thing the new chief exec said was that this, for us, this is the damage to our reputation is going to take years to repair. And there was an incident in our industry, and I think this is why I think it's really important to understand. This starts with people understanding, certainly from a professional point of view, what is right and what is wrong. The Bribery Act is very clear, and if you're a UK company, the Bribery Act applies wherever you're working in the world. That creates a number of challenges. For example, when you're working in countries where paying facilitation payments, for example, are accepted business practice, and businesses have got into difficulties for exactly that issue, where they've been, where an individual has done what he believes is right, but clearly it isn't right. So I think you have to start with educating individuals, and then you have to make sure that is embedded, and I was pleased the comment was made, then with the culture of the organisation that those individuals work within. Because the reality is, in my experience, culture is very often driven from the top down in our industry. So really, it's about maybe actually those leaders of business need to look at their own behaviours and look at the way they run their companies, and the managers below them, because often how you motivate and incentivize people then drives behaviours at the next level down in management, in my experience, making sure that those behaviours are then embedded in organisations, and as was said earlier, if people find a situation they're not comfortable with, because I'll finish by saying that one of the things that I discovered when we started looking at ethics is it affects all sorts of things. It affects people's mental health, for example. If people are put in a situation where they behave in a way which is contrary to their own personal values, that creates tension. Ultimately, that person may well leave the business. So the consequences of those sort of behaviours go way beyond necessarily, as Volkswagen discovered, way beyond just the financial implications.
Can I just talk about the role of the professional? Because I'd say it's almost a definition of professional is that you serve an interest that is not just your client's interest, that you are somehow serving the public interest. So I was really interested in what you said, Simon, about how the professional actually is not any better than other forms of business now. But we have seen generally, and especially in the building industry, a shift of power away from professionals, away from architects in particular. I mean, once upon a time, the architect was probably seen as the main keeper of standards in the building business. Builders might possibly disagree with that, but that's certainly not really the case now. So is part of should we therefore be looking for a return to greater faith in professionals, or has that ship sailed?
I think that's where we want to go to.
Yeah.
We can't. We need to actually build up the trust again fairly comprehensively in order to achieve that. And that means instituting mechanisms that make us more trustworthy, make us more reliable, consistent, prepared to say no when we have to say no, and really sort of pull back from the idea that we're purely a service industry that delivers profits for people, and we go back to our previous role of being in the middle between society and business and act as an independent arbiter that can deliver and cherish things like quality, safety, a number of other things. I mean, we're sort of still in a reasonable position that society views what we do as having value. We haven't lost our reputation for doing that. But what we have lost our reputation for is being the fair and independent person in the middle of the process who all sides can trust to act impartially.
And that's and one of the reasons we're in this situation is because of the very big external and commercial pressures that do tend to squeeze professionals. I mean, Liz, you said you wanted to sort of have something that didn't really require professionals to monitor, or that the trades could. Well, say what you wanted to say, Dan. You were saying you wanted something that enabled trades to have the same standards as professionals. Is that what you were saying?
No, it was a bit of a cheap joke, really, because I was saying we might get there first before Simon and the professionals find their single code. We might, if we're lucky, find a single common code that would unite all the huge myriad of different trades and specialists at tier 2, 3, and individual tradespeople. I don't underestimate the amount of work required to do it for either of our parts of the industry. No, I think the reality, funnily enough, is that in our day-to-day work, we're quite used to working professionals and trades and all the different tiers in construction actually collaborate and work on projects together and respect. If you find good people to work with who share your values and demonstrate a good code of behaviour, you stick with them, you work with them again and again, and in many cases great projects are achieved through those people coming together. I think what we're trying to see is if we can find a way to unlock that and make that happen across, not happen by accident. actually encourage that collaboration where we've got that common language and respect. So the professionals will respect the trades that they will be working with, and the trades will respect the specialist skills and knowledge of the professionals. That's what the Holy Grail it should be aiming for.
Okay. We'll have time for a few questions, which I'll invite in just a minute. I just want to ask Philippa one more question, which is, you talked about the importance of business doing these things for themselves rather than government. But does government not create the kind of the rules, the framework within which business can do good work? Because if that doesn't
Yes.
exist, then you tend to have a race to the bottom, don't you?
Yes, I mean it obviously does through the setting of rules and law, through the democratic process. Hence we've got the Bribery Act, hence Companies Law, which has got Section 172. Then you've got the Financial Reporting Council looking at the listed sector with its corporate governance code, and that has some teeth around it. It's currently being revised at the moment. But the most interesting thing, particularly in this sector, where there are a large number of unlisted companies or employee-owned companies, there's a new board that's been set up, a combination from BEIS and the FRC, which is looking at corporate governance for the unlisted sector. And I'm actually sitting on that committee to see what's the read across, because of course so you haven't got the market mechanism, because the shares are either held by employees or family members or whoever. So I think that is coming down the line. There'll be something due to be published probably at the summer for consultation, but it just shows the way it's going, and I think it's a much better way of going and doing it, and keeping this comply or explain aspect to enforcement than actually using more law, because you can never have enough law to cover every ethical situation.
Yes.
Ethics begins where the law ends and you actually have choice to make, and it's that classic thing, it may be legal but is it right, that you have to answer.
Tell Team Sky cycling team that.
Yes.
Okay. Questions. The gentleman there, and then you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Bert Brown, IC Health and Safety Expert Panel. And you were looking at recommendations. And I suppose a question for the CIOB, because they're here. So members of professional institutions derived income, their livelihood, from the refurbishment of Grenfell Tower.
I can't hear you all that well. Can you speak?
From the refurbishment of Grenfell Tower. So professional members of institutions have derived their livelihood from the refurbishment of Grenfell Tower. In a personal view, they need to be held accountable by their individual institutions. How does that happen in a practical sense? What are the steps that need to take place?
Yeah, I can respond to that. Can you hear me? I can't tell with this, unfortunately,
Yes.
whether it's on or not.
Paul, you need to put it up a little.
It's up there. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a very good question. It's a very important question as well, because ultimately we do have a process. First of all, of course, there has to be evidence of misconduct. So in theory, whether it be an individual sole trader in breach of the code of conduct, or whether it's a large corporation, I'll give you an example of that in a minute, anybody can refer an issue to the Professional Conduct Committee of any professional body. So, you know, if you feel that there's been a breach of the code, and a professional member or a chartered company has acted in a way that's in breach of that code, what then happens is that's then considered by a review panel. Yes, sorry.
Thank you. I just wanted to interrupt because I think we both understand the process. There's been an interim review. There's been a call to action. Is it good enough that the institutions wait for the evidence, or and I realize this is going to take resource, do they actually go looking and get the names and find out who was working on that refurbishment and
Yeah.
and
So
and
what
deal
I'm
with it.
not going to do is get drawn into a debate about Grenfell because it's far too complex.
And I
an
don't
issue.
I don't
What
wish
I
that
want to
either.
do is just explain to you what the process is, and it's the same for CIOB or all the other professional bodies, which is that when a complaint is made, we have to respond to it, and there is a process for doing that. In reality, unfortunately, CIOB has limited sanctions. We can expel members in the ultimate extreme, but we don't have the powers, for example, that the RSCS has to fine members. So our powers are actually quite limited, and the point's been well made on the panel.
Would you like enhanced powers, ideally?
Personally, yes.
Yeah.
That's a personal view.
Okay.
I think is the answer.
I've got time for one more question, I think. The gentleman in the blue sweater, do you still want to? Oh, sorry, or that. Yes, sorry. You're at the back, yes.
So, yes, me? Okay. I'm from the Netherlands. My English is not so good, but I was thinking I work with professionals and they want to change, but somehow they don't seem to be aware that the new way of working is not new techniques, but also a new way of looking at their work and at their ethics. As long as they are not aware that business as usual is not sufficient anymore, they have to develop a new way of working together, a new way, then they cannot change. So I need this awareness first.
What's the question?
So yes, the thing I feel is lacking in your discussion, because I think that's where it starts. The professional has to be aware that the business as he is doing it is not sufficient anymore.
Okay.
And my experience is it's not sufficient. They have to change their way of acting.
Right, I think, Paul, and I don't know if Liz, if you want to come in on this? Okay, very briefly. But
very briefly. That actually was at the root of the decision we took to undertake the review and consult with our membership, because I felt quite strongly, from a very personal perspective as well, that people didn't understand what their responsibilities were. The world's changed. I touched on earlier, most consultancies are now, the big consultancies are global consultancies. So, managing the real day-to-day issues of ethics when you're working in the Middle East, when you're working in China, when you're working in any part of the world, is real challenges. So how do you educate people on what their requirements are? So actually, coming back to the very first thing that Simon said, Rowan said, is we took a step back and said we really need to simplify this and get it back down to some really basic principles, core principles, hence why we ended up with those three ideas.
And I would actually support that and say that it's having the clarity, the simplicity of message, putting it through all the time, and it's all about embedding it. And it's from the top to the bottom of the organisation and the bottom to the top. And just keep doing it every single day, and you'll get somewhere.
Add anything to that? Or?
The only points I would add to any of that is communication. I would say this, wouldn't I? I'm a communications professional. Communication is absolutely critical. Let's celebrate good behaviour. And let's not forget, you're all for taking sanctions and punishing, but let's celebrate the best. Yes, let's have meaningful sanctions against the worst. And fundamentally, let's not assume that once we have a code, that's it, job done. It always changes, it always develops. This is a journey that we are all on, and we will be going through this loop again in a few years' time, and it's right that we do so.
Okay, we're pretty much out of time. I still don't know what we're going to ask government to do. I would like to ask Simon, what would you like the government to do to assist your code in actually having an effect and
I think
difference?
there is a role for government and there's a role for the industry. I think the industry needs to sort its codes out, to be much clearer, ideally to come together about a single code so that they can begin to explain it clearly and again. For government, I think they have a resource in this country in professional services, professional code of behaviour that they need to invest in. And that's not money, that is a sense of belief and trust. And they need equally with the rest of us to work on building up that trust so this country has a really thriving professional sector that will benefit all of us.
And as a major client and funder, it can, as you're saying, it has quite a lot of influence it can to exert.
Government is sat on funding streams, it's sat on projects, it is a client of the industry. If it says that, you know, we will do this if we have trust in a common code of conduct and a framework that genuinely delivers the outcomes we're looking for as society, then they are unlocking a significant market opportunity that would impact on all of our day-to-day lives, and that will get the message home faster than anything.
Right. Okay, well, thank you very much. That was an extremely illuminating hour. Could go on for another hour, or a week, or a month, but anyway, I hope that's all been as interesting to you as it has been to me, and thank you to our speakers and to you all for coming.